It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A national manhunt underway and an independent inquiry ordered, but no confirmed sightings of escaped terror suspect Daniel Khalife. The audacious escape in a food lorry, a symptom of a country now creaking, says Labour, after years of underfunding. Also tonight.
There's nothing you can do. Like, they're the police. They just said, take your clothes off, your socks, all your clothes, keep your knickers and bra on.
Strip searched at 14. A teenager comes forward to accuse officers at Greater Manchester Police. In India, the Muslim businesses demolished after a flare-up in sectarian violence as world leaders arrive for the G20 summit. The key offshore wind target widely expected to be missed when the government holds an auction tomorrow. Plus, daring to dream, can Ireland convert dominance on the rugby pitch into a World Cup trophy? And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. He's been described as a highly trained and resourceful soldier. Excuse me. Tonight, terror suspect Daniel Khalife is still on the run after a daring escape from Wandsworth prison in southwest London. There have been no confirmed sightings despite an extensive manhunt and enhanced security checks at air and seaports. The 21-year-old had been awaiting trial for allegedly planting fake bombs at an army base and gathering information which could be used by an enemy of the UK. An urgent inquiry has now been ordered amid concerns he may have had help. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt has tonight's first report.
This was fugitive Daniel Khalife in happier days, a trainee soldier fooling around for the camera. In a second picture, he appears to have altered his uniform, promoting himself to brigadier. Khalife was still on the run a day after his escape from Wandsworth jail, where he was awaiting trial on terror charges. CCTV showed the food van he escaped in, travelling away from the prison. A passer-by filmed it later being examined by police. There was no sign of Khalife, just the netting he used to cling underneath the van. Police said they'd had 50 calls from the public, but no confirmed sightings of the fugitive.
Daniel Khalife was trained by the UK military. He will be a resourceful individual, and that's important for us to remember when we're trying to find him. But we will be committed to that.
There are two entries to the prison, the main gate and Gate 2, which is used for deliveries. The security procedure at both gates is the same. Vehicles enter through what's called a prison airlock. The van comes in through the front gate. That's then locked while the vehicle is searched. Next, the door into the prison is opened and the van is let through with a security escort. It drives to the kitchen area. Once the delivery is done, the van heads back under the watch of multiple security cameras. The search at this point should be thorough. Mirrors are used to check no one is on top, inside or underneath the vehicle. Only then is it allowed to leave the prison grounds. Police say the van left the jail at 7:32 a.m. It travelled through South London. The alarm was raised at 8:15 a.m. when Khalife was missing. The van made its way through heavy traffic before being stopped in North Sheen just over 20 minutes later at 8:37 a.m. The search for Khalife soon spread far beyond the prison. Checks at South Coast ferry terminals meant long delays for lorry drivers and motorists. Police fear Khalife might have gone abroad, but think it's likely he's still in the UK.
If he's not picked up within the next 48, 72 hours and the weeks goes on, I think that actually suggests quite strongly that this was a highly sophisticated escape for which he had an awful lot of assistance.
A former inmate at Wandsworth said an escape at some time was inevitable.
Those prisoners who do work in the kitchen are incredibly close to outside and, as we've seen with this escape, are just a few steps from a lorry which will carry them away to freedom.
The Prison Officers Association blamed the escape on budget cuts. They had led, it said, to staff shortages and inadequate training. As the Justice Secretary announced an independent inquiry into the escape, The Chief Inspector of Prisons said Wandsworth, old and understaffed, should ultimately be shut down. Martin Brunt, Sky News at Wandsworth Prison.
Well, that call for Wandsworth Prison to be shut comes as the Prime Minister also grapples with the school's concrete crisis. Both are political headaches which have allowed the opposition to shine a light on 13 years of Conservative spending. Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has more now on the latest setback in the Rishi reset.
First week back, and the problems have been piling up for government. Each prompts a similar refrain.
Vast majority of schools in our country do not have RAG.
I mean, it is very rare for prisoners to escape.
Will you get better performance out of this?
The tone set by the man in the driving seat, arguing that the escape of a terror suspect from Wandsworth jail is a one-off.
These incidences are extremely rare. The Justice Secretary has initiated already an internal inquiry into the specific circumstances around this particular individual.
You've got to get this absolutely right every time.
The job of the opposition now to paint the picture of a country creaking after 13 years of spending pressure and political turmoil.
There were already some pretty damning reports into Wandsworth, issues about staffing, issues about buildings, and that's a pattern of behaviour now under this government, whether it's this prison or other prisons or other infrastructure across the country. And it certainly hasn't helped that in the last 10 years we've had 10 Justice Secretaries.
Thank you.
This is the 10th Justice Secretary in a decade. He insists staffing isn't the issue.
The positions were staffed. The security posts were occupied. The question is whether protocols applied.
MPs on all sides unsure.
Shockingly, only 7 prison officers turned up for a night shift last December to cover 1,500 inmates.
It's a matter of record that there is an issue with staffing at Wandsworth and that there is an issue across the prison service.
Some urge drastic action.
It really needs closing, ultimately. It's not a suitable prison to be...
You should shut down...
housing people in...
You'd shut down Wandsworth. That's
well, in an ideal world, one would.
But will there be cash to help relieve the pressure in future?
As hard as Labour tries, you can't actually directly link the escapee from Wandsworth Jail to the political turmoil or funding squeezes of the last few years. But Tory MPs are nevertheless very nervous. This is a blot on the law and order copybook. They know there's a perception that prison budgets have been squeezed, and nothing since last week's reset seems to have gone well for Rishi Sunak.
After feeling the heat this week, Rishi Sunak now flies to India to meet with world leaders. Will temperatures in here have cooled by the time he returns? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Across now to Sadia Chowdhury, who's outside Wandsworth Prison. And Sadia, still no sign of Daniel Khalife nearly 40 hours after he went missing, and concerns that we're hearing that it could have been an inside job.
Well, it certainly has the hallmarks of being an inside job, doesn't it? The way it was effectively executed, the fact that there are no clues, and seemingly a very highly organised operation. And as you say, 40 hours later, still no signs of Daniel Khalife and no confirmed sightings. More than 100 officers have been involved in this manhunt so far. Yesterday, we saw some of them in local woodlands looking for him. And today, that search widening out to the port of Dover, where there have been extra security checks with the fear that he may have already left the country or be planning to leave the country. Well, here at Wandsworth Prison, there are accusations that this may have been prevented had there been more resources, more staff. A claim that £900 million has been cut from the prison service budget. So tonight, Gillian, a spotlight, no doubt, scanning the country looking for an escaped prisoner, and another one shining directly at our prison services.
OK, Sadia, thank you. There are the accusations first reported by Sky News, which have already resulted in an independent inquiry. Tonight, there are new allegations against Greater Manchester Police. This time, a teenager has described how she was strip-searched, aged 14, without an appropriate adult present. With those new claims, a new warning too, that sex offenders are still serving as officers. Sky's home editor, Jason Farrell, has this exclusive report.
There's nothing you can do. Like, they're the police. They just said, take your clothes off, your socks, all your clothes, keep your knickers and bra on.
Scarlett, now 18, says she was strip-searched in police custody aged 14 because police thought she was concealing an e-cigarette.
They were searching in my toes again, in my waistband of my knickers, making me pull my bra up to see if, if anything dropped out.
And what do you think? I mean, what do you think the reason was they did it? Because it doesn't
Probably
sound...
to humiliate me, to be honest with you. Like, when I think of it now, I was young, like, I didn't want anyone to see my body, at that age, especially, like, strangers. Safety around.
Did you have, I mean, you were 14, you must have had an appropriate adult with you when you were strip searched.
No.
Really?
My appropriate adult hadn't been called. I just got to they were checking me in.
Right.
At that point, no one's ever there. Your solicitors, they've not even called the solicitor. They've not called appropriate adult. Like, I was literally just being checked in.
So you're a child and they didn't call an appropriate adult to strip search you?
No, they didn't ask me if I wanted one or nothing.
Greater Manchester Police is now subject to an inquiry by Dame Vera Baird, which was launched following a Sky News investigation into strip searches broadcast in July. While police have the right to search for contraband items, such as weapons or drugs, Scarlett is not the first example we've found of police searching for a vape. We showed this video footage of Zaina Iman being stripped in a police cell while apparently unconscious. Zaina also alleged she was drugged and raped in custody, and after exercising her right to see the footage from her time in the cell, found that 2 hours were missing. She says she has flashbacks of being abused.
I don't talk about my memories, and the reason I don't talk about my memories is because I don't want to believe them myself. It would have been far easier if Greater Manchester Police's narrative of me was right.
Greater Manchester Police previously told the Mayor's office and Zaina that they'd reviewed all the CCTV from her cell and found no evidence of criminality or misconduct, but more recently said the missing footage is due to a corrupted disc, seemingly contradicting the claim that they viewed it all.
A piece of film which showed something appalling happening, for instance, to the young woman you've spoken to today, or to Zaina, as she believes it did, that will be a real serious issue for the police. But if they were to be covering it up, it would be a huge issue for the entire police force, going right to the very top.
GMP says it's fully supporting the IOPC investigation and Baird review and engaging with those affected, but will not be commenting publicly until the findings have been published. With regards to Scarlett, they say, when in police care and custody, people can and should expect to be treated with care and dignity and within approved guidelines. Unfortunately, this report does not sound like these values were reflected in the young woman's experience. I thank Sky News for bringing this concerning complaint to GMP's attention. They've also been in touch with Scarlett to progress her complaint. More worrying stories are emerging. Scarlett's is one of several cases Sky News is passing on to the inquiry, and abuse victims charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, say they are taking 5 other women to meet the inquiry chair this week. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Police are preparing to launch a criminal investigation into maternity failings at Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. The announcement comes after officers met with Donna Ockenden to discuss her independent review into services in the city. The Trust has been ordered to make significant and immediate improvements over concerns mothers and babies were not safe. Affected families said they welcomed the long-awaited news. Network Rail has pleaded guilty to health and safety failures over a 2020 train crash in Scotland that killed 3 men. Train driver Brett McCullough, conductor Donald Dinny and passenger Christopher Stutchbury died when the train travelling from Aberdeen to Glasgow derailed after it hit a landslide following heavy rain. The former Conservative Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, has resigned after losing his appeal against being suspended for drunkenly groping 2 men. There were likely to be a by-election in his constituency of Tamworth in the West Midlands in October, which the Prime Minister has admitted will be difficult for his party. A man accused of being a senior member of a people smuggling network, despite himself trying to claim asylum in the UK, has denied being a criminal mastermind. Hewa Rahimpour and 20 other defendants are charged with facilitating the passage of around 10,000 migrants across the English Channel. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports from Bruges.
This is the man Belgian prosecutors say was the leader of a gang that smuggled up to 10,000 migrants across the Channel. Arrested last summer as he drove to work in his Mercedes in London. In court, Hiwa Rahimpour, we can't show his face here for legal reasons, claimed he was simply a money man. His lawyer insists he just handled payments between migrants and the gang.
Most money goes to Turkey, Iraq, and I think that there are the real bosses, only they are not in the investigation.
Rahimpour said he was from Iran, but we've been told he's actually from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. Sources have told Sky News he owns expensive properties there and that he's known by a different name, Hama Koshnal. Hiwa Rahimpour arrived in Britain back in 2016 as an asylum seeker. He said he'd come from Iran. He moved to East London, but there are still lots of questions about his background and where did he come from originally. What we do know for certain is that while he was involved in the serious crimes that have been outlined in this trial, he managed to blend into his local community. He settled in East London, and after a failed attempt to start a barber shop, he turned his hand to retail. Rahimpour rented and ran a food kiosk here, selling sweets and chocolate, but admitted in court it also served another purpose. Relatives of migrants came here to pay for their Channel crossings, and Rahimpour admits he took a slice of that. His landlady was Linda, the hairdresser next door. She says she was shocked by his arrest, but remembered Rahimpour's popularity.
I see all the neighbours, because obviously I'm a hairdresser and we know, and I see so many guys going by, saluting him, talking to him, and he was nice. He was nice to everyone around here, to be honest.
But he is now accused of grave crimes. The verdict will come next month. Rahimpour could face 13 years in prison. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Bruges.
Rishi Sunak is on his way to India tonight, soon to be joined by other world leaders for the G20 summit. They'll be hosted by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a self-proclaimed Hindu nationalist who has presided over an increase in sectarian violence. Clashes between different communities have erupted across the country, with recent flare-ups in Manipur, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra. Also, the Muslim-majority district of Nuh in northern India, from where Sky's Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch sent this report.
Dusk in Haryana, home to so-called cow vigilantes. Their goal? To stop the trade and slaughter of what Hindus consider sacred. But they've been accused of lynching Muslims and inciting recent communal clashes in India. By night, we meet some members.
In this video, we save 11 cows, but we don't save 2 cows.
What do you say to those Muslims who are scared, who feel on edge, under threat?
We have weapons only for self-defense and save the cows. Every Indians, it is the moral duty to save the animals from slaughtering.
They tell us Nuh, a Muslim majority area, is a focus. In July, hardline Hindu nationalists marched through it. And news that a cow vigilante called Monu Manasar was going lit a fuse. He's accused of involvement in the murder of 2 Muslim men, which he denies. Stones were thrown, cars burned, and 6 people were killed. Among them, Jaina Devi's husband Shakti, who is Hindu. She says he was trying to rescue his family.
What impact has your husband's death had on you?
Without your men, is there any life? We have 4 children. It's all on me. There is no work. When he was here, he used to do labor and feed the children. Without a man, what can you do?
Do you think it was provocative that the march took place in a Muslim majority area?
Yes, that is why the riots happen. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
But what followed was familiar.
This was the site of more than 40 Muslim-owned businesses, but as you can see, they've been completely flattened, and many of the owners have told us the bulldozers turned up without warning to completely destroy the buildings and ultimately their livelihoods. But the district authorities say the businesses were built illegally on government-owned land.
Sectarian violence has flared under nationalist leader Narendra Modi, but he strongly denies encouraging religious polarisation, hailing India as the mother of democracy. In New, they don't feel that maternal embrace. They do accept some in their community were wrong to react, but they also feel like targets.
Do you feel under threat from Hindu nationalism?
They are heading to other communities, so this is disturbing to any nation, because if hate will be occur, the nation will not progress.
Do you accept that there were Muslims responsible for some of the violence?
Yeah, I think both are responsible for that violence, but the major issue was violence occurred due to the starting point. The starting point was the Mono Manasar and the Bittu Bajrangi.
In a world looking for a powerful partner, India is trying to cut an image as a global mentor. The test is whether it can also protect those at home with a much smaller voice. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Haryana, India.
There are warnings today that the UK could fall behind a key target for new offshore wind power, with a government auction scheduled for tomorrow, widely expected to flop. It's more evidence the country's net zero ambitions are being hindered by a new economic reality, as our business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
Offshore wind is the engine room of the UK's net zero ambitions, already providing 40% of our electricity. But plans to treble capacity by 2030 may be stalling, with a government auction for new wind farms expected to flop. Britain's biggest renewable generator told Sky News the price has been set too low for the sums to add up.
Unfortunately, because of movements in interest rates, cost of equity, and also particularly supply chain, you've suddenly seen those cap prices look a little tight, and therefore it's made it difficult for some companies to decide they want to bid. And indeed, for the project we had, it's a little bit smaller than some in deeper waters and further north in the UK, and therefore we just wouldn't have been able to even get a bid in at that cap price.
Offshore wind has been a roaring success, with prices falling as capacity has grown, but inflation has put the industry under pressure. One leading generator has mothballed its wind farms off the Norfolk coast.
The economics don't stack up for any offshore wind farm at the moment. That's why we've paused development of our Norfolk Boreas project, and we're now looking to see how the best way to take forward the whole zone.
Any slowdown will put suppliers under pressure too. Nippon Electric Glass make fiberglass used on turbine blades.
But it's got to be sustainable for the future, otherwise business like ours won't be able to exist, because we won't be able to afford to trade in that space. So we'll either move to different spaces and find different industries to service and move away from wind.
Wind farms have become a familiar sight on our coastline as renewables auctions have grown capacity and pushed down prices. But this latest round has bumped into the new economic reality. Until now, auctions have made a virtuous circle of offshore wind, not just secure, green and abundant, but it's much, much cheaper than natural gas, which makes the failure of this round not just a blow to the UK's net zero ambitions, but also hard evidence that the cost of delivering them is going to rise for government, for business and for consumers. Offshore wind will remain cheaper than the alternatives, and the climate cost of doing nothing is unconscionable. But the true scale of the energy transition challenge is becoming clear. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Today is the hottest day of the year so far, with a top temperature of 32.6 degrees Celsius recorded in Wisley in Surrey. According to the Met Office, this month's heat wave is about to break the record for the most consecutive days above 30 degrees in September. Today's temperatures are expected to be surpassed on Saturday. They are on a 13-game winning streak and the world's top-ranked rugby team, so it may come as a surprise that Ireland has never won a knockout game in the World Cup. But with the other home nations underperforming, Irish fans are now, whisper it, daring to dream of a trophy. Their mantra, think it, don't jinx it. Here's Stephen Murphy.
There's a whole generation of young rugby players who have known nothing but Ireland's success.
As I've grown up, like, you'd be angry when Ireland lost, and you wouldn't have that too much. Like, we get to see Ireland win quite a lot.
These players at Wesley College in Dublin, which produced the current World Player of the Year Josh van der Flier, are looking forward to Ireland starting its World Cup campaign.
I think they can do it. I think the past season has been incredible, and the results that they've got, I think, yeah, I have full confidence that they can do it, yeah.
Ranked #1 in the world for more than a year, Ireland go into this World Cup as the Six Nations Grand Slam champions and on a 13-game winning streak. But it doesn't mean there isn't a nervousness.
We've built this moment for the last 4 years, really. So when it's finally here, the nerves do come in. But it's about embracing them and going out and trying to play our best.
The nerves are understandable. Ireland has a long record of underachieving at World Cups, never getting past the quarter-finals. The thing about the Irish sporting psyche is that it always embraces being the underdog. Ireland has never won a knockout Rugby World Cup match in its history, and you can sense a real reticence here to embrace any talk of actually winning the tournament. You can see it from rugby legends.
Help me spread the message around the country. You can think it, just don't jinx it.
Or from the country's leaders.
I really feel that this year could be our year, but we've just not managed to pull it off so many times in the past. I'm always kind of afraid to hope.
But former international Rob Kearney says the quarter-final jinx is also an opportunity.
It is a big obstacle. At the same time, this team will be very aware that they're a new group of players. They're very different to all the other teams that have gone by, and they have broken history many times before, and they will just see this as another opportunity to break history again.
The tournament lasts for 7 weeks. Ireland's next generation of players hope history can be made when the final whistle blows. Stephen Murphy, Sky News, Dublin.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the economist and broadcaster, Steve Richards, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this story on the front of the Metro, their headline, Motorway chaos in hunt for terror spy. Motorway chaos, obviously. Do stay with us for more on that story and others. welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, the first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Chief Inspector of Prisons has told Sky News that Wandsworth Prison should be shut down following the escape of terror suspect Daniel Khalife. A teenager has told Sky News that she was strip-searched by Greater Manchester Police when she was just 14 without an appropriate adult present. And a criminal investigation is being launched into maternity care at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust following an inquiry into the deaths of dozens of babies. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Metro leads with the chaos on the M20 as police continue their hunt for Daniel Khalife, who escaped from prison on Wednesday. The Eye reports on an investigation into the possibility the prison escape was an inside job. The Guardian also leads on that story, writing that the escape has led to a row over prison cuts. While the Daily Telegraph leads on Rishi Sunak refusing to offer more work and student visas to India in exchange for a trade deal. 1 year on from the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the Daily Mirror runs a message from King Charles. Thank you for your love. Meanwhile, the FT focuses on the expected 8% rise in state pensions as a result of the government's triple lock. The Express says the triple lock is under threat unless the retirement age is raised. The Times writes that police are investigating an alleged cover-up of more than 1,700 cases of avoidable harm at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust. And the Daily Star reports on claims Sir Ken Dodd is haunting his old house. Their headline, Doddy didn't become a ghost, did he? I think you had to know who Ken Dodd was to get that reference there. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome to you both. Let us start with the Metro. Their headline, motorway chaos in hunt for terror spy. This in reference to the manhunt for Daniel Khalife. Salma, take us into this story.
Yes, so this is giving us a little bit of detail about the lengths at which authorities are going to in order to locate this escaped terror suspect, and that there are long queues of lorries that are forming outside the M20 as extra security checks are causing delays in search for him. So obviously giving you a sense of scale of what this actually involves to try and locate him. But still, what is interesting is that the Metropolitan Head of Counter-Terrorism, Dominic Murphy, has warned that he could be anywhere in the country at the moment. So there doesn't seem to be any cause for celebration yet.
No, indeed. And the Telegraph also on this story suggesting that the missing terror suspect may have had help. This is a quote from a detective. Steve.
Yeah, well, you can see it's why it's on so many front pages, because there are so many levels to it. On one level, it's a worrying and alarming story. On another, it has a sort of James Bond kind of element to it, the chase, no one knows where this person is. I thought those lorry queues were another Brexit story at first, but it's not. And then there is speculation about how it happened and whether there are deeper causes, like the funding of prisons and so on, or whether, as the Telegraph puts it, the suspect may have had inside help. And nobody knows for sure, because nobody knows very much at all about how this happened and where he is. And while that remains the case, it's going to be a big story, and then the implications will be explored as well.
And Salma, a major headache for the government.
Yeah, huge. And it's very difficult because they need to investigate at the moment to understand what has actually happened. And there seems to be some failures, indeed, in terms of the process of where he was actually placed in a Category B prison as opposed to a Category A. So we are actually going to have to try and locate the cause of this, but regardless, it's going to have to be a government minister who walks out and takes the flak for it.
Yes, and as you say, that the category of prison is likely to pay a huge question in as to why
and just very quickly, it's another story. I know we're going to look at another in this review of who is in control of what and who is ultimately responsible. And it's fascinating when a prisoner escapes. You know, in the past, a Home Secretary has been under pressure to resign when a prisoner escapes. But who ultimately takes these decisions? It's never clear in these stories. It's one of the kind of issues about who really is in control of public services in Britain at the moment.
Well, we'll find the answer out to that as this story develops over the coming days and this manhunt continues. The Eye looking at it from the point of view that the suggestion that it's an inside job.
Yeah, and this is interesting because they're saying that the government is actively investigating whether or not he was helped by staff or fellow inmates. Now, at this point, given that we have no leads, it seems, as to where he might be in the country, it is perfectly reasonable for the government to look at all options. I'm not sure that we should be looking at this as a potential answer, but that the government is actually trying to ascertain where he is and whether this could lead to any more information.
But Steve, obviously they're looking at all options because there's little that's known at this point.
But because it's not at all clear. And then they will have to explore some of the wider implications of whether he was in the wrong unit and all the other things and who took that decision and why and who was accountable to whom. The question at the heart, usually, of all these stories.
To the FT and possible Tory autumn by-elections. Well, we know now that there definitely will be. Salma.
Yes, well, it's amazing because actually it's a small story on the front page of the FT, and I think there's going to be more on the insides of the newspapers. But this is about Chris Pincher, who you will remember was the MP who has had to resign over a groping row, which has triggered this by-election. But this is another headache for Rishi Sunak because it's a long line of by-elections that he really doesn't need at this point in the electoral cycle. But as I'm sure Steve is thinking about as well, this is going to be a real litmus test. And we were talking earlier that Tamworth, actually, you covered this when it changed hands to Labour in '97.
Yeah.
This is potentially a big a bellwether, as they say, for the election.
There was a by-election there in the build-up to 1997, and Labour gained it. And it was seen as another example of Labour moving to power, as it will be this time if they were to gain it. No one knows in advance. But that's why sometimes by-elections don't really matter very much. But I've got a feeling the ones this autumn do, and will really set the scene and determine the mood. If Labour gain Tamworth, there's the Tories must fear. There's another really important one in Nadine Dorris's old seat, where actually all three parties are battling out. There's a huge one in Scotland, Rutherglen, and I think these will determine the mood of the kind of autumn as much as some of the other things that will be talked about, the party conferences, autumn statements and things. These are big mood setters, these by-elections.
And Salma, Rishi Sunak has already admitted that he's slightly nervous about these by-elections coming up.
Yeah, and I think that's sensible expectation management from a Prime Minister that knows that he's going to be on the back foot for this.
Let's move on to the Times. This story about the Nottingham NHS Trust, the maternity scandal, as it's been reported, the cover-up of baby deaths being investigated by police. Steve?
Yeah, well, this is really interesting again, and it's the same theme, obviously a very different story as the prisons, in that you try and work out who is responsible for what. I found it very interesting with the whole Letby affair, reading the emails of surgeons to managers, managers to other managers in the Chesterfield, the Chester Hospital. And it wasn't really clear who was in control, who was taking command of that crisis, as it clearly was, although some people didn't accept it. And here again, we have another police investigation in another part of the NHS. And I think we will find the same themes emerging again. Was there a cover-up? What form was the cover-up? Who was involved in it, if there was one? If it wasn't a cover-up, was it incompetence? In which case, it's these same questions whirling around these big institutions in Britain. And, you know, we've both worked at the BBC. Whenever there's a BBC crisis, it's very hard to identify who precisely is responsible for what. And I think this is kind of whirling around all these stories.
And Salma, the police are going to be working alongside Donna Ockenden, senior midwife, who's carrying out this review. So it's all-encompassing. She's investigating the maternity services at the Trust.
Yeah, she is. And what's interesting about this is obviously this is looking back as a consequence as well in some ways of the Letby affair. But the numbers that we're talking about is that the Nottingham Trust is accused of failing potentially 1,700 families in this case. So you would expect it to be all-encompassing. What's also interesting is that they are investigating in particular whether staff have breached a duty of candour. Now, you can put a lot of regulations on people, but as Steve says, once you get into a complex institution, actually, does any of this regulation actually matter? Does it make a difference? And I think that is something that we actually need to learn about the way that these structures are working, or not, as the case may be.
We've just got time to fit in this on the front of the Telegraph, and this is Rishi Sunak as we speak on his way to India, and it's the likelihood of how the trade talks will pan out. He's not going to offer more employment or more visas to India, we read.
Yeah, well, that's a sort of pitch at this point in a negotiation. I suspect in the end the deal will include visas because that's something that India will want. But this is a sort of briefing. It's very interesting when prime ministers travel, their spin doctors have to brief, as you know very well, stories, and the story he wants clearly at the moment is going to be tough to sort of please his right-wingers who are already worried post-Brexit. People are coming from other parts of the world. But I wouldn't be at all surprised at the end of that deal that visas play a part, not least because in many cases the kind of people that Britain needs at the moment could be met by people coming over from India. But that's clearly what they want on the front page of the Telegraph tomorrow.
But Salma, is that going to appease those to the right of the party, of which we have Suella Braverman listed as one who's opposed to, you know, more visas and extensions of that?
I think the problem with coming out and sort of trying to be tough in a negotiation is that it's fine to be tough in a negotiation, but ultimately, if visas are going to be a concession, you're going to have some very upset people on the right wing of the Conservative Party. So he set expectations very high, and if he doesn't meet them, there's going to be a backlash to it. And saying that as well, you know, I worked on visa policy in the Home Office. It is inextricably linked with economic policy. And in this piece, the Prime Minister says immigration policy is going to sit outside of that. Well, we're talking about economic migration. We're talking about growth. These things have to be part of a trade deal. It was always expected that these would be part of a trade deal. So I think it is slightly pushing the boundaries on the reality of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We shall see what the reality turns out to be. Salma and Steve with a minute. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break coming up. Thank you for your love. A message from the King a year on from the Queen's death.
This is, of course, wonderful news for the orangutan conservation. Bornean orangutans declined by nearly 90% since the mid-70s. That's over the last 50 years. It's quite astonishing to estimate that more than 2,000 are being hunted a single year. So it's wonderful news for the Bornean orangutans, but of course, fantastic news for all of us here, the staff, and for our visitors and supporters who can come into the zoo here in Chester and potentially see the little baby immediately. The new baby, though, is born to Mum Sariki. She's a 39-year-old Bornean orangutan with her. It's her fourth baby. What's particularly significant is that Bornean orangutans normally only have a baby about once every 7 years. It's the lowest interbirth interval of any of the apes. So it really is a landmark. And so actually it's its brother, who was the last time we had a birth, which is 7 years ago, here at the zoo, Tomble. Yeah, it's a terrible litany of things actually that's gone on. I mean, firstly, the forest in Borneo is just disappearing. There is less of it left now. It's somewhere between 40 and 50% of it left. Certainly, when I was a boy, Borneo is one of the last untouched paradises. People thought of it as an entire island of forest and exploration. That's no longer the case. Also, orangutans live in lowland forests. That's forest near the coast. And much of the forest that's left is the most difficult forest to clear that's in the uplands, in the highlands, in the central Borneo. And that's cleared for a whole range of things that obviously we're strongly advocating people buy products with sustainable palm oil. That's been one of the major drivers of deforestation, but also forest fires. And as much as the habitat loss, it's the hunting. We cannot take more than 2,000 of these animals out of the forest a year and expect the population to survive more than the next few decades. If you're actually then killing and poaching, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 a year, that is literally centuries worth of babies that are just being taken in every single year. I think it'll be a fair few weeks before we, find out the sex of the baby, and she starts to build a bit of confidence. And then perhaps we'll come back to you when we name it, if you're interested.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Let's have a look at the front page of the Financial Times and this story about pensions. The Treasury is preparing to increase the state pension by more than 8% next year because of the controversial triple lock pledge, which has raised retirees' incomes faster than workers' wages. Steve, take us into this story.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things. The triple lock is bonkers in that it guarantees these big increases for pensions. The FT reminds us that the state pension rose by 10.1% the year before this new pay rise. And
just
everyone...
to explain again what the triple lock is.
It locks in the pension rate, there are other locks it does as well, on the basis of wage growth at a certain point. And it is always the most generous possible rise you can get each year. And, of course, it's a universal rise. Lots of pensioners are very well off, don't need it, and getting it. Everyone knows it's bonkers, and no one knows how to break it. Labour, who are, projecting fiscal caution, in a way that makes Sunak seem profligate at times, are committed to the triple lock, even though they know it's bonkers. And the reason being, of course, is pensioners vote. And no one dares go, especially in a pre-election period, dares to challenge it. Although I noticed you reported the Express saying, if this is going to continue, the pension will have to start at a later working age. It's very expensive, and but no one can work out how to end it.
Yeah, so the pension rises.
Electoral politics, that's all.
So the pension rises each year in line with inflation, average earnings, or by 2.5%, whichever is highest.
Is the highest. It's always the highest possible option.
Is it bonkers, Salma, as Steve says?
No, I don't. I actually don't think it's bonkers. And one of the things that Steve and I will probably rarely disagree on. And I find it interesting, and I've noted here that it's described as controversial. And I don't think it is controversial because the reason for the triple lock was to ensure that pensioners who can no longer earn and are living off their retirement don't lose out. And I understand that people are talking about the disparity in wealth between those people who are probably sat on properties and had an easier time versus younger people who are now facing job insecurity and a capital insecurity. But that wealth isn't realised for a lot of people. It's trapped in their homes and things like that. So I think we have to be really mindful that, you know, as much as it is an issue now, there was a reason for the triple lock, there was a sensible reason for the triple lock, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in this instance.
But you see, it could be realised if they really needed the money, they could sell a property. Young people up has largely been about regional inequality, which is a big theme. But generational inequality is huge. And when you're getting these big flat rate, universal pay rises to people irrespective of wealth, and then you've got young people who can't contemplate buying a house, and renting even is a nightmare, I think it's impossible to justify. But no party would dare challenge it, not actually on your very reasoned grounds, but just the electoral calculation.
Interesting point you raised, though, about that generational inequality, which is something that we're going to be discussing a lot more about, I would say, in years to come. Let's take a look at the Mirror and the King's message 1 year on. This is a year on tomorrow from the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. The message, thank you for your love. Salma.
Yes, and obviously it's the anniversary, and I think lots of people are going to be feeling a little bit wistful about Her Late Majesty's reign, and you'll see that it's featured on all the front pages today. And I do think that it's important to mark it, because even though it's been a year and we've sort of settled into this new reign, I think, with great ease, I think people, well, I certainly do, still miss the late Queen.
And Steve, do you think that there should be some sort of national marking of the anniversary? There doesn't seem to be anything particular.
Is there not? I'm sure there'll be a lot in the media tomorrow. And I can't believe it's a year ago. I can so vividly remember Liz Truss making a statement in the House of Commons, messages being passed back and forth to Starmer and all the rest of it. But what does interest me, well, of course, it's, you know, I understand people feeling sad about it, but there was a lot, I think, of overblown talk about an era ending and a country being traumatised for a long time to come. Now, the country was traumatised in September, but more by the Liz Truss era and the budget that all went wrong. To be honest, I think, than the Queen dying in her 90s. Was she in her 90s? And it doesn't feel to me as if an era ended and a new one has just begun. It might do in other matters of politics and whether we're ending an era of Conservative rule, but I don't feel profound change.
I think a lot of people would differ.
No, I'm sure.
I think in longer time, historians may judge this differently. I mean, it's a year, but it's still only a year. I think in historical terms, I think this will be a real marking of a break and change.
I think you're right, Salma. Salma and Steve, for the moment, thank you very much. We shall see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And the fine weather will continue for a few more days for most, with temperatures rising a little further. Saturday may be the hottest day of the year so far, but there are already signs of change with thundery showers in the west. The morning early mist and fog will clear, whilst low cloud will burn back to coastal areas. It'll be a warm start to the day, with temperatures already in the mid to late teens for many and above 20 Celsius in parts of the south. It'll be dry for many, but there'll be a few showers over Ireland. Some northeastern coast will remain rather dull and cool, whilst there'll be greater amounts of cloud in the southwest.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.